paper discussion, Neurips 2025, Horizon Discussion in Horizon Reduction in Offline RL. This is a paper co-authored by Sergey Levine and others. I think it's an interesting tidbit. It's a technical paper, but I think it's important because it shows that in offline RL, there's a lot of inefficiencies and that you can cut those by just shortening the planning horizon. What does that mean in practice? First, what is offline RL? Offline RL is kind of like imitation learning. So you're looking at an agent, let's say a robot or a person has made coffee, and you're looking at all the steps, and then you're using those steps for a robot to learn how to make coffee. So offline means the robot is taking data which has been generated in the past and learning from that data. So that's offline RL, and you're using reinforcement learning in a sense that you're giving the agent rewards if it does the right thing. There's value learning and policy learning. Value learning is if you let the agent do its thing and then just give the agent values based on what it does, and then maximize the value. And policy learning is instead of waiting for end results and then giving values, you just rate every action, kind of like a coach that looks at a tennis player, and every time she moves says, okay, you should move your hip a little bit more, versus this way and that way. Versus value learning would be you let her do her thing and then you just say, okay, look, you just lost the set because you didn't play well, you need to change your style. So in offline RL, what the authors are saying in their introduction is that you have long horizons and they often blow up computationally and they're very inefficient. And if you shorten that horizon, shorten meaning, let's say you just do a couple of moves and then you say, okay, was this good or bad? And if it was bad, you go back and you try something else. So you just shorten the horizon. I mean, it kind of sounds like duh. I mean, yeah, but it looks to me that the research community in offline RL is still struggling with some really basic questions. For example, this horizon question, I thought should have been answered by now, but it hasn't. And the authors are showing theoretical, this is an academic paper. So it's actually interesting because if you think about this philosophically, okay, what does this actually mean? It just means that in certain tasks, short horizon is enough information to get you to the right path. And in certain tasks, it isn't. So the question, and this is the conclusion and the open questions here in the paper, are it's not as much, well, we should shorten the horizon to reduce compute and complexity. I mean, that's duh. But the question here is more, okay, what kind of tasks open themselves up for offline RL in the first place? And if so, it's usually the tasks where you can shorten the horizon, because you don't want to have an explosion in data and compute because, offline RL can be very inefficient. So this is more of a, almost the tail's wagging the dog here, because if you pick the right tasks, offline RL, or the right goals to pursue, the offline RL can be a really good solution. And in certain situations, maybe offline RL isn't such a good solution. So, for example, maybe chess playing or Go playing is not such a good offline RL because the rewards are very sparse, and you don't have, like, the counterfactuals that are offered in the system are not enough to guide you towards a good solution unless you play the whole game, and that can be computationally very complicated. So I think that what's interesting in this paper, it's like often in AI, you start questioning basic things. So for example, in real life, you might ask yourself, okay, certain things are really, like, short horizon is good. Like, for example, when you learn, when you go to college, in certain situations, it's okay to just go from midterm to midterm, quarter to quarter, get your grades. You will eventually end up in a good place. Or you might ask yourself, no, actually, this is not such a good, I actually need long horizon exploration, some sort of maybe online training in other words, I don't quite know exactly what the skills and the goals to pursue will be in 4 or 5 years when I graduate. So I'm much better off exploring more, and offline RL, in other words, focusing on other people's experience might not be such a good solution. So in that case, I would say college, definitely offline RL and short horizons are not a good solution. It's the other way around. You want to explore, you want to do something more like online. In other words, what that means in practice, of course, is you want to try many different things. You want to have a portfolio of coursework. You want to have internships. You want to work. You want to do some clubs. Like you want to try because it's not so clear. Versus maybe if you learn how to cook a Chinese recipe, I think offline RL might work, and you can actually really, do a couple of steps. You can taste, you can see how the texture is, and you can go from there. You don't need to plan the whole thing and play out all the trajectories. So to summarize, I think this paper gives a technical solution. SHARSA is a technical solution to the problem of how to cut the horizon. It also opens up the question of which tasks open themselves up for offline RL, which ones don't. And I think the answer is the ones where you can cut the horizon in shorter epochs and have good results. Those are the kinds of tasks where offline RL is actually good. And tasks where you can't cut the horizon, where the outcome is very sparse and the counterfactuals don't give you information unless you play the whole game. Those are not so good for offline RL, so you might want to use other models. Thank you.